You know this one. Lying in bed trying to fall asleep, and the trying is exactly what keeps you awake. A name stuck on the tip of your tongue, and the harder you reach for it, the further it runs. You force it, it escapes. Every single time, the same pattern. And you've probably never once stopped to ask why. What if that wasn't bad luck? What if it was the actual mechanism of your own mind, working exactly as designed, just against you, instead of for you? There's a quote everywhere online, credited to Carl Jung. Don't force anything. Let life be a deep let go. It's beautiful. It's also almost certainly not something Jung ever wrote, and we'll get to that honestly. What isn't in question is the science underneath it. In the next few minutes, you're going to see the experiment about a white bear that explains why forcing always backfires, and the one adjustment that turns effort from your enemy into your ally. I want to tell you about the month I tried to manifest a job through sheer mental force, because it's the most embarrassing story on this channel so far. I'd applied for something I wanted badly, and somewhere I'd absorbed the idea that wanting wasn't enough. I had to hold the intention constantly, as if belief were a muscle that would fail the moment I stopped flexing it. So I flexed it, constantly. I checked my email every 20 minutes. I ran the scenario in my head, over and over, willing it into place. I treated every good sign as confirmation, and every bad sign as a test of my resolve. And I did all of this with a grim, joyless intensity that I genuinely believed was helping. Looking back, the actual content of what I was doing was almost comic in its precision. I had specific times of day set aside for manifestation work. I had a note on my phone I reread multiple times daily, as though the reading itself were an act of maintenance, like watering something that would wilt the moment I looked away. I remember explaining this routine to a friend with total seriousness, watching her expression shift from polite interest to quiet concern, and not being able to see from inside it what she was clearly seeing from outside it. It wasn't helping. I know that now, and I half knew it then in the specific way you know something is wrong while still being unable to stop doing it. The forcing didn't feel like faith. It felt like gripping a rope that was already slipping, harder and harder, as if grip strength alone could undo the slip. Here's a question worth asking honestly before we go further. Think of the last thing you tried to force into happening through sheer willpower alone, not effort applied skillfully, just raw, anxious insistence. How did it actually go? Most people, asked that question directly, describe some version of the rope slipping faster the harder they gripped. Hold on to your own answer to that question. This video is going to come back to it more than once before it ends. There's a specific tell worth noticing in your own answer to that question, if you're honest about it. It's rarely the effort itself that people regret afterward. It's the specific flavor of the effort, grim, joyless, watchful, that they recognize in hindsight as having felt more like fear wearing the costume of determination than determination itself. I didn't get that job, for reasons that had nothing to do with how hard I'd gripped the outcome. And in the strange, deflated weeks afterward, I came across research that had nothing to do with manifestation, nothing to do with spirituality, sitting quietly in a psychology journal from the late 1980s. Research that explained, with far more precision than any online quote ever could, exactly why my month of forcing had been not just unhelpful, but actively counterproductive. I remember the specific relief of finding it, oddly closer to the relief of a diagnosis than an insight, the sense of finally having a name and a mechanism for something I'd only ever experienced as a vague, guilty feeling that I was somehow doing wanting wrong. This is the part that reframes the whole conversation, and it's worth being exact instead of poetic about it. The question was never, does the universe reward effort or surrender? That framing treats the two as opposites you have to choose between, and reality turns out to be stranger than that choice. The real question is, what does deliberate, anxious mental effort actually do to the process you're trying to control? And why would trying harder ever make an outcome less likely instead of more? Hold that question loosely for a moment, the way you'd hold something you suspect is about to surprise you. I want to be honest that understanding this didn't retroactively get me the job, and it wouldn't have even if I'd understood it at the time. That's not the promise this video is making. What understanding the mechanism actually changed, months later, applying for the next thing, was the specific quality of how I held the waiting. I still checked my email. I still wanted it. But I stopped treating every hour of silence as a referendum on my own resolve, because I finally understood that the checking itself had never been protecting anything. It had only ever been costing me the peace of the waiting without improving the odds of what came after it. It's worth being clear that this isn't a claim that effort doesn't matter, because that would be a different, less honest video than the one this is trying to be. The actual work, writing the application well, preparing genuinely, doing the thing that gives an outcome a real chance, matters enormously, and none of what follows is an argument against it. What's being questioned here is narrower and more specific. Not effort itself, but the anxious, repetitive checking that gets mistaken for effort when it's actually a completely separate activity, running on a completely different mechanism, quietly working against the very outcome it claims to be protecting. That explains why the forcing felt so exhausting and produced so little. It wasn't a failure of intensity. It doesn't yet explain the actual mechanism at work, or why a psychologist studying something as small as a white bear would end up explaining one of the most common forms of self-sabotage in modern life. And that requires going back to a lab in the 1980s, where researchers asked people to do something that sounds almost too simple to matter. Picture a small group of research participants sitting alone in a room, given one simple instruction. For the next 5 minutes, think about anything you want, except a white bear. Whatever you do, don't think about a white bear. Notice how simple that instruction sounds, and how confident most people would feel accepting it. A white bear is an arbitrary, emotionally neutral image. No trauma attached, no strong personal association, nothing that should make it especially hard to avoid thinking about for 5 short minutes. If any thought should have been easy to suppress on command, this was it. That's the detail that made the findings so unsettling to the field when it was first published. This wasn't a study about people trying to suppress something genuinely difficult, like grief or craving, where some resistance might be expected. It was the easiest possible case for suppression to succeed, and it still failed reliably in room after room of ordinary participants who had every reason to expect they'd manage it easily. They were given a bell to ring every time the white bear came to mind anyway, despite the instruction not to think about it. The bells rang, constantly, far more often than in a comparison group who'd simply been asked to think about a white bear freely, with no suppression instruction at all. Trying not to think about something didn't produce fewer thoughts about it. It produced more, an almost mocking abundance of exactly the image participants had been told to avoid. This was a real study, run by social psychologist Daniel Wegner and colleagues, first published in 1987, and it became the foundation for what Wegner called ironic process theory, a genuinely elegant explanation for why deliberate mental suppression so reliably backfires. Wegner's model proposes that suppressing a thought requires 2 separate mental operations running at once: an active, effortful part of the mind, searching for anything other than the forbidden thought, and a quieter, automatic monitoring process, constantly checking whether the forbidden thought has appeared, so it can be caught and redirected. That monitoring process is exactly the problem. To check whether you're thinking about a white bear, some part of your mind has to keep the concept of white bear active and ready for comparison, which means the very system meant to suppress the thought is, by necessity, keeping it loaded and accessible the entire time. It's worth sitting with how strange this architecture actually is, once you see it clearly. Suppression, under Wegner's model, was never a simple act of refusal, the way it feels from the inside, like a door you close and walk away from. It's closer to hiring a guard whose entire job is watching for the thing you don't want, which means the guard has to keep a perfect mental picture of exactly what they're watching for, on permanent standby, for as long as the suppression continues. The guard doesn't forget the white bear in order to look for it. The guard has to remember it more precisely than anyone else in the room. Under ordinary conditions, this monitoring process runs quietly enough in the background that the effortful, active part of the mind can usually outcompete it, keeping the unwanted thought mostly out of awareness. But introduce mental load, stress, fatigue, divided attention, exactly the conditions most people are actually in when they're trying hardest to force an outcome, and the effortful part of the system gets weaker, while the automatic monitoring process keeps running at full strength. Under load, the very mechanism built to suppress the thought becomes the thing that surfaces it again and again, precisely when you have the least capacity left to fight it off. This is worth sitting with specifically, because it explains a pattern almost everyone has noticed without understanding why. The harder a day gets, the worse the unwanted thought gets, exactly when you'd expect exhaustion to simply quiet everything down. It doesn't quiet down. Under Wegner's model, exhaustion selectively weakens the expensive, effortful part of suppression, while leaving the cheap, automatic monitoring running, which means the thought you're least equipped to handle shows up most reliably on the days you're least equipped to handle it. Now, before this starts sounding like a story only about white bears, here's the bridge worth making explicit. If trying not to think about something requires keeping that something loaded and monitored in your mind, what do you think happens when you try to force a desired outcome by constantly checking whether it's happening yet? The monitoring itself keeps the anxious, doubtful version of the outcome just as active as the desired one. Maybe more active, because doubt is usually what triggers the checking in the first place. It's worth being honest about what this research doesn't claim, the same way this video has tried to be careful with every mechanism it's covered. Wegner's findings don't mean every form of attention or awareness backfires. Noticing a worry once, acknowledging it, isn't the same as the sustained, effortful suppression his studies actually tested. The ironic effect specifically requires an active intention to keep a thought out of mind, maintained over time, usually under some form of load. Simply having a thought cross your mind and pass, without a suppression command attached to it, doesn't trigger the same rebound. The danger isn't thinking about things, it's the specific architecture of trying hard not to. It's worth pausing here on the Jung quote this video opened with, because intellectual honesty matters more than a tidy narrative. Don't force anything, let life be a deep let go, circulates everywhere attributed to Carl Jung, often alongside his photograph, in a tone that implies it's a documented line from his published work. As far as careful research into Jung's actual writings can establish, there's no verified source for this exact phrase in anything Jung published. It appears to be one of the many quotes that accumulate around well-known thinkers online, plausible sounding, thematically consistent with real ideas Jung did explore, but not traceable to an actual text. This video isn't going to pretend otherwise just because the quote fits the theme well. What's real and what this video actually stands behind is the mechanism Wegner documented, not the sentiment borrowed from an uncertain source, but the specific replicated science of why forcing backfires. It's worth understanding why quotes like this one spread so easily in the first place, because it's not simply carelessness. Jung genuinely did write extensively about the dangers of the conscious ego trying to forcibly control processes better handled by what he called the unconscious. Themes that make a line like, "Let life be a deep let go," feel entirely plausible as something he might have said, even if he never actually wrote that specific sentence. The misattribution works precisely because it's thematically accurate, even where it's factually wrong, which is exactly the kind of claim this channel has tried to be careful about throughout this entire week, and won't abandon now just to close the series on a tidier note. Wegner's original white bear study has been replicated and extended dozens of times since 1987, across suppressed thoughts ranging from neutral images to emotionally charged ones, including anxious and depressive thought patterns specifically, and the core finding holds with remarkable consistency. Effortful suppression under cognitive load reliably increases the frequency of the very thought being suppressed, compared to simply allowing the thought to occur without a suppression instruction at all. It's worth naming a few of the specific extensions, because they show how far this mechanism reaches beyond a lab exercise about bears. Researchers studying dieting have found that actively suppressing thoughts about forbidden foods often increases food-related thoughts and, in some studies, subsequent eating of exactly the suppressed food, compared to approaches that don't rely on active suppression. Researchers studying grief and intrusive memories have found related patterns, where effortful avoidance of a painful memory frequently increases its later intrusion, compared to approaches that allow the memory to be acknowledged without a suppression command attached to it. None of these studies are about willpower failing. They're about the same architecture Wegner identified in 1987, showing up wherever a mind is instructed to actively not think about something specific. The breadth of that list is worth pausing on. Dieting, grief, insomnia, public speaking, romantic anxiety, wildly different domains, unified by a single shared mechanism, first documented with something as unassuming as a bell and a white bear in a room in the 1980s. Stay with me here, because this is where it stops being abstract cosmology of thought suppression and starts being about your actual Sunday. That validates the paradox from Block 1. But it opens something harder to sit with, because if trying not to think about something makes you think about it more, what exactly is trying to force an outcome doing to your relationship with that outcome every single day you spend gripping it? Here's where this stops being about a lab and a bell and starts being about your actual week. Think about the last time you tried to force yourself to sleep. The instruction you gave yourself, fall asleep now, you need to be up early, stop thinking, is functionally identical to the white bear instruction. It requires a part of your mind to actively monitor whether you're asleep yet, which requires staying awake enough to check, which is the exact opposite of what you're trying to produce. The monitoring doesn't support the goal, it structurally prevents it, the same way checking for a white bear guarantees you'll keep finding one. Notice too how this specific trap tends to worsen with each attempt. The first bad night of forced sleep is frustrating, but the second night carries an extra layer. Now you're not just trying to sleep, you're also monitoring for whether tonight will be another bad night, which loads exactly the fear that made the first night bad and reinforces it further. Insomnia researchers have documented this exact spiral for decades under different names. The anxious anticipation of poor sleep becoming a more reliable predictor of poor sleep than almost anything else measured, precisely because the anticipation is itself a monitoring process, running the identical architecture Wegner described, just aimed at rest instead of a white bear. This spiral has a specific, well-documented name in sleep research: sleep effort, sometimes described as trying too hard to sleep, and clinical treatments for chronic insomnia increasingly focus specifically on reducing this effort rather than adding new relaxation techniques on top of it, precisely because more techniques often just become more things to monitor for. Think about the last important conversation you walked into, having told yourself forcefully, just be relaxed, don't seem nervous. Notice what that instruction actually requires: constant internal monitoring of your own nervousness, checking whether it's showing, checking whether you sound relaxed enough, which keeps your nervous system exactly as activated as if you'd been told to focus on how nervous you were. The forced calm produces, ironically, more vigilance about anxiety than simply letting the nervousness exist unmonitored ever would have. This is the actual mechanism hiding underneath a huge amount of ordinary self-sabotage that gets blamed on bad energy or resistance. It was never really about some mystical block. It's closer to a matter of architecture. The checking mechanism built to force an outcome requires keeping the unwanted alternative loaded and active in your mind, which is precisely the wrong condition for the outcome you're actually trying to produce. None of this requires you to believe in bad energy or good energy at all. It requires believing something considerably more mundane, and for that reason considerably more actionable, that a specific cognitive habit, well documented since 1987, has been quietly running in the background of whatever you've been trying hardest to force. Watch how this plays out with something as ordinary as trying to enjoy yourself at an event you're nervous about. I need to have a good time is, structurally, a suppression instruction pointed at anxiety. It requires monitoring whether you're having a good time yet, which keeps the possibility of not having a good time constantly loaded and checked against, exactly the way checking for a white bear keeps the bear in mind. People who report the best time at social events overwhelmingly describe forgetting at some point that they were monitoring themselves at all. Not because they tried harder to have fun, but because the monitoring simply dropped away. This extends into first dates, job interviews, any situation where the stakes make self-monitoring feel not just tempting but responsible. The internal narration, am I coming across well, do they like me, is this going okay, feels like useful vigilance, the way checking your mirrors while driving feels useful. But unlike checking mirrors, this specific kind of monitoring doesn't gather new, actionable information nearly as often as it simply keeps the feared outcome loaded and rehearsed. The version of you running that narration in the background is measurably less present, less quick-witted, and less genuinely engaging than the version of you that forgot to check for a stretch of minutes, a difference other people can often sense even when they can't name what changed. Here's a fact worth sitting with directly. In research building on Wegner's original findings, psychologists studying anxious thought patterns specifically have found that instructing people to actively suppress a worry produces significantly more subsequent intrusions of that exact worry than instructing people to simply let the thought occur and pass without fighting it. Ask yourself honestly, how many worries in your own life have gotten louder specifically because you declared war on them, checking constantly for signs they'd returned, rather than letting them exist without that vigilance? Here's the part that reframes what most people mean by trying harder. Then you cannot simply decide to stop caring about an outcome. That's not what this video is asking, and it wouldn't work even if you tried, because stop caring is itself a suppression instruction pointed at caring. What actually shifts things is noticing the specific difference between skilled, engaged effort, doing the actual work a goal requires, and anxious monitoring, which is checking over and over whether the work is paying off yet. The first moves you forward. The second keeps the doubted outcome loaded exactly as actively as the desired one. There's a simple test worth using in the moment the next time you catch yourself deep in either one. Ask, is this action adding something new? New effort, new information, new material the outcome didn't have before? Or is it simply confirming again something I already know? Writing another paragraph adds something. Rereading the same paragraph for the 9th time to check if it's good adds nothing except another loaded confirmation of doubt. The first is work. The second, however busy it feels, is the grip tightening on a rope that was never slipping because of your hands. Consider how this shows up in something as small as rereading a message you sent, checking it for the 10th time to see if it sounds needy. Every reread is a fresh monitoring cycle, keeping "this might sound needy" just as loaded in your mind as whatever confident tone you were originally going for, which means the checking itself is quietly working against the outcome it's trying to protect. This shows up in an even more exhausting form around job searches and creative work specifically, because both involve outcomes that take real time to resolve, leaving enormous stretches of ambiguity for the monitoring system to fill. Refreshing an inbox 40 times a day for a response that hasn't come yet isn't gathering new information. There's almost never anything new to find. It's running the exact same suppression architecture as the White Bear study, keeping still no response loaded and checked against over and over, in a loop that produces nothing except renewed anxiety with each cycle. The waiting was never going to feel comfortable. But the checking makes it measurably worse than the waiting alone would have been, because checking is monitoring, and monitoring is exactly the mechanism Wegner's research identified as the problem. Notice too how this plays out in creative work specifically. Writing, making something, building something, where people report their best output arriving in stretches where they'd forgotten to evaluate themselves, and their worst, most stilted output arriving during stretches of constant self-assessment. Is this good? Is this working? Is this good enough? That question, asked repeatedly mid-process, isn't neutral curiosity. It's a suppression instruction pointed at, this might not be good, which keeps exactly that possibility loaded and active in the mind, generating the work. So if forcing an outcome structurally requires keeping its opposite loaded and monitored, what's the actual alternative? Not simply giving up, not passive indifference, but something with real mechanical structure to it, the same way suppression has real mechanical structure. What does the brain do instead when it's actually working well? That question is worth carrying forward carefully, because the honest answer isn't stop trying. It's considerably more specific than that, and it comes from a body of research that at first glance seems to have nothing to do with forcing an outcome at all. Research about peak performance, about athletes, musicians, and surgeons at their absolute best, and what was actually happening in their minds during the moments everyone else called effortless. Hold that question through the section break, because the answer is worth the full weight of what comes next. This is the layer that gives let go and let the universe guide you its actual mechanism, once you strip away the mystical framing and look at what psychology has documented under a much less poetic name. In the 1970s, psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi began studying a specific mental state he eventually named flow, the experience, reported consistently across athletes, musicians, surgeons, chess players, and people doing ordinary demanding tasks, of complete effortless absorption in an activity, where self-consciousness drops away, time perception distorts, and performance often reaches its peak. What made Csikszentmihalyi's research significant wasn't simply describing the pleasant feeling of flow. It was identifying the specific conditions under which it reliably occurs, and just as importantly, the specific conditions under which it collapses. Csikszentmihalyi's early research method is worth knowing because it wasn't built on speculation. He interviewed hundreds of people across wildly different fields, rock climbers, composers, surgeons, chess players, asking them to describe their best, most absorbed moments of performance in specific detail, and later developed methods to sample people's experience at random points during their actual day, catching flow and its absence in the moment rather than relying purely on memory afterward. Across all of it, a consistent pattern emerged. Flow appeared reliably when the challenge of a task closely matched a person's skill level, hard enough to demand full attention, not so hard it produced anxiety, not so easy it produced boredom, and specifically when attention was fully absorbed in the task itself, rather than split towards self-evaluation. That skill challenge matching detail matters more than it might seem, because it explains why just let go fails so often as advice when the task is genuinely too hard for the person's current skill level. Underskilled for a challenge, letting go of monitoring doesn't produce flow. It produces the anxiety Csikszentmihalyi documented as flow's opposite state because the implicit system genuinely isn't calibrated for a task this far beyond it yet. Flow was never simply the absence of monitoring. It's the absence of monitoring specifically layered on top of adequate preparation, which is why this video keeps returning to that same qualifier instead of letting the "just let go" message stand on its own. The connection is closer than it might first appear, and worth stating plainly before moving into the mechanism itself. What breaks flow is structurally identical to what makes a suppressed thought return. Flow tends to break down under one condition more reliably than almost any other: explicit, effortful self-monitoring. The moment a skilled performer starts consciously checking their own performance in real time, watching their own hands, narrating their own technique, anxiously verifying whether they're doing well, the smooth, automatic execution that flow depends on gets interrupted by exactly the same kind of monitoring loop Wegner documented with the white bear. This phenomenon has its own well-studied name in sports psychology: choking under pressure, and researchers studying it have found a consistent mechanism behind it. Skills that have become automated through practice run best on implicit, non-conscious control systems. Explicit monitoring, consciously attending to the mechanics of a skill that's already automated, pulls control away from the smooth implicit system and hands it to a slower, more effortful conscious one, degrading performance on exactly the tasks the implicit system was already handling well. The classic demonstration of this involves skilled athletes performing a well-practiced motor task, a golf putt, a free throw, a piece of choreography, under two conditions: normal execution and execution while being asked to consciously narrate each step of the movement as they perform it. Across study after study, the narrated condition produces measurably worse performance in experienced performers. Even though the same narration instruction often has little effect or even helps, novices who haven't yet automated the skill and are still relying on conscious step-by-step control anyway. The instruction that helps a beginner hurts an expert because it forces an already automated system back into slow, effortful, conscious processing it had already outgrown. It's worth sitting with that reversal because it's the cleanest evidence available that trying harder isn't a single uniform thing that always helps in the same direction. For a beginner, conscious attention to mechanics is exactly what's needed. There's no automated system yet to hand control to, so deliberate, step-by-step thinking is the only system available. For an expert, that same conscious attention actively interferes with a system that had already surpassed what conscious thought could manage in real time. The difference between the two isn't willpower or talent. It's simply whether the underlying skill has been practiced enough to run implicitly, the exact same variable Csikszentmihalyi found determining whether flow was available at all. Stay with me here, because this is where it stops being abstract sports psychology and starts describing the actual texture of forcing an outcome in your own life. Anxious monitoring doesn't just fail to help a process along. Under both the ironic process research and the choking under pressure research, it actively degrades processes that were capable of running well on their own. Verbal fluency in a conversation, creative problem solving, even physical coordination. By yanking control away from the fast, well-calibrated implicit system and handing it to a slow, effortful, anxious one that was never built to run the process in real time to begin with. Think about the last time you were genuinely articulate about something you know well, versus a time you tried extra hard to sound articulate about the same subject. The extra effort, counterintuitively, usually produces the worse version. More hedging, more circling back, more visible self-correction. Because trying to sound articulate is itself a monitoring instruction, pulling the same fluent, implicit language system that normally runs smoothly into slow, self-conscious, effortful control. This is where "let the universe guide you" gets its actual, unmystical translation. It was never a claim that some external force takes over if you simply stop trying. It's closer to a precise, testable claim about your own nervous system. Reducing explicit, anxious self-monitoring allows implicit systems, ones shaped by whatever real skill, practice, and preparation you've already put in, to run a process more smoothly than conscious, effortful checking ever could. The letting go isn't passivity. It's a deliberate handoff from a slower, anxious system to a faster, better calibrated one that was already doing good work before the checking started interrupting it. Think about how this reframes what athletes and performers actually mean when they describe getting out of their own way, a phrase that sounds vague until you connect it to the specific mechanism this video has been building. They're not describing a mystical surrender to fate. They're describing the precise moment explicit monitoring switches off and control genuinely transfers to a system that had already been trained through hours of unglamorous, repetitive practice to handle the task better than conscious deliberation ever could in real time. The surrender isn't to the universe, it's to their own prior preparation, finally trusted enough to run without supervision. This also explains why let-go advice so often fails when it's given without the preparation underneath it, and why that failure gets blamed on the person rather than the missing context. Telling someone anxious about public speaking to simply let go and trust the process is nearly useless if they've never actually practiced the speech enough for an implicit system to exist yet. There's nothing calibrated to hand control to. Under Csikszentmihalyi's framework, flow was never available to that person yet, because flow specifically requires a skill challenge match that hasn't been built. The advice isn't wrong. It's simply being given a step too early, skipping the actual work that would have made it true. It's worth being precise about the limit of this claim, the same way this video has tried to be honest about every mechanism it's covered. This doesn't mean all effort is bad, or that trying never helps. Skilled, engaged effort, actually doing the work, actually practicing, actually preparing, is exactly what builds the implicit system capable of running well without conscious monitoring in the first place. Csikszentmihalyi's flow states don't appear in people who've never practiced the skill. They appear specifically in people who've practiced enough that the skill can run implicitly, and who then stop consciously narrating it. Letting go without any underlying preparation isn't flow. It's just absence. The letting go this video is describing is what happens after real work, not instead of it. This distinction matters enormously for how this video's message could be misused if it isn't stated carefully. Someone who hasn't prepared for a presentation and simply decides to let go and trust the process isn't accessing a calibrated implicit system. There's nothing calibrated there yet to hand control to. What they're actually doing is closer to hoping, dressed in the language of flow. The mechanism this video describes rewards preparation specifically because preparation is what builds the thing worth trusting. Letting go of monitoring you never earned the right to release isn't wisdom. It's just under preparation wearing a spiritual outfit. Here's the mechanism, stated as plainly as this video can manage after everything it's covered. Forcing an outcome keeps its unwanted opposite loaded in active memory. The same way trying not to think about a white bear guarantees you'll keep finding one. Anxious monitoring of a process pulls control away from the calibrated, implicit systems that were already handling it well, handing control to a slower, more effortful, more error-prone conscious system instead. Letting go isn't giving up on the outcome. It's specifically withdrawing the monitoring, the checking, the verifying, the anxious reconfirmation that was quietly sabotaging a process capable of running better without it. Say that back to yourself, in your own words if it helps, before moving to what this actually means for the rest of your week. I want to stop explaining the research for a second and just talk to you. Take a breath before this part, because it's asking you to be more honest with yourself than the research alone required. Because I think you already know what you've been checking on too closely, a relationship you keep testing for signs it's cooling, a project you keep reopening to verify it's still good, a decision you keep relitigating in your own head, as if enough vigilance could substitute for having already done the work. I don't need to know the specifics to know the shape of it, because it always has the same shape. Something you actually prepared for, actually worked on, actually have real competence in, undermined not by lack of ability, but by the anxious habit of checking on it so often that the checking itself became the interference. Maybe it's a piece of work you've reread so many times you can no longer tell if it's good, the way any word starts to look misspelled after enough repetition. Maybe it's a friendship you keep quietly auditing for signs of distance, reading warmth as suspicious and silence as confirmation until your own vigilance has become the only thing straining the relationship. Maybe it's simply your own competence at something you're actually skilled at, undermined nightly by rehearsing every way it could still go wrong. You're not being asked to stop caring. You're being asked to notice the difference between the work you've already done and the monitoring you're still doing on top of it, because only one of those is still helping. That's not surrender. It's recognizing when the grip has started working against the rope instead of holding it. I want you to actually picture it for a second, before this video moves to its close, the specific thing you've been gripping, not in general terms, the actual thing, the actual checking. Picture setting it down just for tonight, not because it stopped mattering, but because your hands are tired and the rope was never slipping because of your grip strength, just for tonight. That's not a permanent decision. It's a single small experiment in what your own well-prepared systems can do without supervision. Back to where we started. The sleep that won't come because you're forcing it. The name that won't surface because you're reaching too hard. The white bear that shows up precisely because you were told not to look for it. Here's the one-sentence version of everything this video has tried to say. Forcing an outcome keeps its opposite loaded in your mind by mechanical necessity, and letting go was never passivity. It's the specific, deliberate act of withdrawing the monitoring that was sabotaging a process you'd already prepared well enough to trust. Sit with that sentence for a moment before the video closes, because it's asking you to hold two things at once that usually get treated as opposites: real effort and real release. This week has made the same argument in 5 different forms. Measure honestly, rehearse deliberately. Remember you're not alone, then, only then, stop checking so hard. Each piece needed the one before it. This last one needed all 4. And here's the layer worth naming honestly to close out this week. Across the 5 videos before this one, this channel has asked you to measure your perceptions more carefully, to rehearse a chosen version of yourself on purpose, to notice how much company you actually have in the parts of life that feel loneliest. This last one asks something that might sound like it contradicts all of that. Stop checking so hard, but it doesn't contradict it. It completes it. Measuring, rehearsing, choosing. All of that is the real work. The preparation Csikszentmihalyi's research says has to come first. This video isn't telling you to skip that work. It's telling you that once the work is actually done, the anxious rechecking of it is the only thing left standing in the way. I think about the version of me gripping that rope, that month, checking an inbox every 20 minutes. And I don't think the mistake was wanting the outcome. The mistake was believing the gripping was part of getting it, that vigilance was a form of effort, when it was actually a completely separate activity, quietly working against everything the real effort had already accomplished. I'd done the actual work weeks earlier, in the application itself. Everything after that was just checking, dressed up as devotion. That's what "let the universe guide you" actually means, whether or not Jung ever said it. Not a force outside you taking over. The quieter, better calibrated part of you that was already capable, finally getting the chance to run the process without a nervous supervisor standing over its shoulder. Whether Jung wrote those words or not, somebody at some point needed to hear them badly enough that they've kept circulating for years, misattributed and all. Maybe that somebody was you tonight. The words don't need his name on them to be worth listening to. They just needed to be true, and tonight they are. You were never being asked to force less because effort doesn't matter. You were being asked to stop grading your own effort while it was still happening. Let that be the last thing you carry out of this week. More than any single fact from any single study, the work counts. The grading of the work in real time rarely does. If this video gave you language for something you'd already sensed but never had a mechanism for, that's exactly what this channel exists to do every week. Subscribing isn't a favor to me. It's a private agreement with the version of you that's ready to trust the work you've already done. That's who this channel is built for. Whatever you've been gripping too tightly this week, the rope was never slipping because you weren't strong enough. It was slipping because gripping was never the right hold to begin with. If you've watched all 5 videos this week, you've built something without necessarily noticing it, a way of measuring what's actually in front of you instead of what old habit assumes is there, a way of choosing which version of yourself gets rehearsed instead of leaving it to accident, a way of recognizing you were never as alone with hard things as dread convinced you. This last piece was never separate from that work. It was always the part that lets you finally stop white-knuckling everything you'd already built. Comment, I let go now. That closes this week's journey, from how you measure your reality to how you rehearse yourself into it, to finally learning when to stop checking and let it hold. If any part of this week found you, there's more waiting. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for spending this much of your week here. That's not a small thing, and I don't take it lightly.